Shadows of Solitude. Julian Reed stared at the rain-streaked window of his study, the words on his laptop screen blurring like the view outside. 3 bestsellers and a mansion on the outskirts of Portland hadn't filled the hollow in his chest. He sipped his cooling coffee, watching a slender figure move through his gardens despite the downpour. Iris Chen worked with a grace that captivated him. For 6 months, she had transformed his neglected grounds into something magical, much like she had begun to transform the quiet spaces within him. Her dark hair, now plastered to her neck in the rain, gleamed as she knelt to tend to the roses she had planted along the stone path. "Miss Chen," he called, opening the French doors to the terrace. "You'll catch your death out there." She looked up, rain streaming down her face, and smiled. "These need protection from the storm, Mr. Reed. They're still fragile." Just like him, though he'd never admit it. Not since Sarah's death 3 years ago had anyone shown such dedication to anything connected to him. Iris didn't just tend to plants. She somehow nurtured the emptiness around him. "Come inside. The tea is ready," he said, surprising himself with the invitation. Their interactions had always been professional, brief exchanges about the gardens or household matters. In the warmth of his kitchen, Iris removed her rain jacket, revealing a simple blouse and jeans. Her hands, though marked with soil, moved with precision as she accepted the cup he offered. "You've been writing again," she observed, nodding toward his ink-stained fingers. "Trying to. The words don't flow like they used to." She smiled softly. "Sometimes the most beautiful things grow in silence. Like your midnight lilies, they needed darkness before they could bloom." Julian studied her face, the gentle curve of her mouth, the wisdom in her eyes that seemed beyond her 28 years. "How do you understand things I've never said aloud?" "I listen to what isn't spoken," she replied simply. The next morning, Julian woke with unusual anticipation. He had asked Iris to join him for dinner that evening, not as employer and employee, but as 2 people sharing a meal. She had accepted with a quiet, "I'd like that very much." He spent the day alternating between writing with renewed inspiration and glancing at the gardens where Iris worked methodically, her hands bringing order and beauty to what had once been chaos. By afternoon, he had written more than he had in months. He prepared to shower for dinner, watching Iris finish her day's work. She gathered her tools and looked toward his window, offering a small wave that made his heart quicken. But when evening arrived, Iris didn't. Julian waited, checking his watch repeatedly as the dinner he had prepared grew cold. By 9 o'clock, concern replaced disappointment. This wasn't like her. Iris was unfailingly reliable. He called her cell phone. No answer. He walked to the small cottage at the edge of his property where she stayed during the work week. Empty, with her few possessions gone. On the kitchen counter of his main house, he found a simple note in her elegant handwriting. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me for leaving this way." "Iris!" No explanation. No goodbye. Just emptiness where she had been. Julian stood in his suddenly hollow kitchen, holding the note, feeling as though the gardens outside had withered in an instant. Whispers in the Garden. Part 2. Vanished Blooms. 2 weeks passed with no sign of Iris. Julian paced through his gardens, now showing signs of neglect without her tender care. The roses she had shielded from the storm were wilting, much like his spirits. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, tossing aside the manuscript he'd been unable to focus on. His editor had been calling daily, concerned about missed deadlines, but Julian couldn't concentrate. How had a gardener he'd known for only half a year left such a void? He'd hired investigators, discreetly, but they found little. Iris Chen, aged 28, had appeared in Portland 8 months ago. Before that, her history was fragmented. Born in San Francisco to immigrants, studied botany, worked at several estates. No social media presence. No close friends interviewed could explain her sudden departure. "Mr. Reed?" His housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, appeared at the study door. "There's a Ms. Nadine Tran here to see you. Says she's a friend of Miss Chen." Julian nearly knocked over his chair standing. "Send her in immediately." Nadine was petite with sharp eyes that assessed him critically. "So you're the famous author she couldn't stop talking about." "Where is she?" Julian asked, dispensing with pleasantries. "Iris asked me not to tell you." Nadine crossed her arms. But I'm worried about her. She's in Sacramento at Mercy Hospital. Julian felt his stomach drop. Is she hurt? Not exactly. She's with her brother Daniel. He's dying. Stage 4 leukemia. The revelation hit Julian like a physical blow. Why didn't she tell me? Nadine's expression softened slightly. Iris keeps her pain private. Always has. But there's more to it than Daniel's illness. She found something in your library while organizing books last month. Something about Sarah Lockhart. Julian froze. No one mentioned Sarah's name to him anymore. What about her? I don't know details. Just that whatever she found connected her brother to your past fiancé. It shook her badly. Nadine handed him a small key. This opens her cottage. Check the loose floorboard under her bed. And Mr. Reed? She cares about you. Maybe too much. After Nadine left, Julian rushed to Iris's cottage. The loose board revealed a weathered journal and a photograph he'd thought lost forever. Sarah laughing beside a young boy at a hospital charity event 10 years earlier. He flipped the photo over. Sarah's handwriting read, "Me and my little warrior, Daniel Chen. Remission Day." Julian sat heavily on Iris's bed, memories flooding back. Sarah had been a pediatric oncologist before the accident. She'd mentioned a special patient once, a boy she'd treated for years. Daniel Chen, Iris's brother. The coincidence was too perfect to be coincidence at all. Seeds of Truth. Sacramento's Mercy Hospital smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. Julian navigated sterile corridors, Sarah's photograph burning in his pocket like a talisman. Room 418. He paused outside the door, hearing soft voices within. Iris was reading aloud, something about gardens and seasons changing. Her voice caught occasionally, betraying tears she was fighting to control. He knocked gently. The reading stopped. When Iris opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. "Julian, how—" "Nadine," he explained simply. Her face paled. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but to Julian she had never looked more beautiful, raw and real in her vulnerability. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. A weak voice called from inside. "Iris, who is it?" She hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing Julian to enter. Daniel Chen lay propped against pillows. His body thin, but his eyes startlingly alive, the same deep brown as his sister's. An IV stand beside him delivered clear fluids, and monitoring equipment beeped steadily. "You're Julian Reed," Daniel said, his face lighting with recognition. "I've read all your books." "Daniel, this is my former employer," Iris explained carefully. Julian approached the bed, studying the young man's face. At perhaps 25, Daniel retained boyish features despite illness having carved hollows in his cheeks. "I think we have a mutual connection," Julian said gently, removing the photograph from his pocket. Daniel's eyes widened as he took it. "Dr. Sarah," he breathed. "You kept this? I didn't know I still had it until today." "She was my fiancée." Iris stood rigidly by the window. "I found it while organizing your library, with letters Sarah had written to Daniel over the years. I shouldn't have read them, but—" "Sarah saved my life," Daniel interrupted. "I was 10 when the leukemia first appeared. She was my doctor for 5 years. Even after I went into remission, she checked on me, sent birthday cards, visited when she was in San Francisco." His fingers traced Sarah's smiling face. "When I heard about the accident, it broke something in me." Julian felt his throat tighten. "She never told me details about her patients. Doctor-patient confidentiality. But she mentioned a special case once, a boy who fought harder than anyone she'd known." "That was me," Daniel said with a weak smile. "When the cancer returned last year," Iris said quietly, "I started searching for Dr. Sarah. I wanted to tell her. That's when I learned she had died. And about you." She met Julian's eyes. "I needed to understand the woman who had meant so much to Daniel, who she had become, who she had loved. So you sought me out," Julian said, realizing the truth. "The gardening position. It wasn't meant to be deceptive," Iris said, her voice breaking. "I just wanted to know her through you." "But then what?" Julian pressed. Daniel's weak laugh interrupted them. "Then she fell in love with you, you idiot. Tender roots." Silence filled the hospital room after Daniel's blunt revelation. Iris turned away, her shoulders tense as she pretended to adjust Daniel's blankets. "Is that true?" Julian asked softly. "Daniel needs to rest," Iris replied, avoiding his question. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation outside." In the sterile hallway, Julian gently took her arm before she could retreat further. "Iris, look at me." When she finally met his gaze, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she whispered. "I came looking for connections to Sarah for Daniel's sake. A piece of her to bring him comfort. I didn't plan to— To what?" "To find myself caring for the man she loved," she admitted. It felt like a betrayal somehow. "To her, to you, even to Daniel." Julian led her to a small waiting area, empty except for worn magazines and the lingering scent of coffee. "Tell me everything, Iris. No more secrets." She took a deep breath. When Daniel's cancer returned, he asked about Dr. Sarah. He'd tried reaching out years ago but lost contact after changing addresses. "I promised I'd find her." Iris twisted her hands in her lap. "Instead, I found obituaries, articles about the accident, and mentions of you, the author she'd planned to marry. So you applied to work for me?" She nodded. "I just wanted to know her through your eyes. Maybe find mementos, stories to bring back to Daniel. But then I started to know you, not just Sarah's Julian, but the man who stared at rainstorms for hours, who left coffee cups in every room, who spoke kindly to the delivery people, who touched the spines of books like they were old friends." Julian felt a warmth spreading through his chest despite the confusion of the situation. "The more I knew you," Iris continued, "the harder it became to explain why I was there. And when Daniel took a turn for the worse last month," she closed her eyes briefly, "I found Sarah's letters in your library. She'd written to Daniel about you, how happy she was, the life she imagined. I couldn't stay after reading those. It wasn't right." Julian covered her trembling hands with his own. "Sarah would have wanted Daniel to know she hadn't forgotten him." His voice softened. "And I think she would have liked you very much, Iris." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Really? You both see beauty where others don't notice it? You both nurture things back to life." He smiled sadly. "Including me, it seems. Julian, I—" A nurse hurried toward them. "Ms. Chen?" "Your brother's asking for you." They returned to find Daniel watching the door expectantly. "Took you long enough," he said with a weak smile. "I was starting to think you'd run away again, sis." Iris moved to his side, brushing hair from his forehead with gentle fingers. "Julian," Daniel said, his voice stronger than before, "there's something I need to say while I still can." Julian approached the bed. "I'm listening." "Sarah used to tell me that love isn't something you find once and lose forever. She said it's more like a garden. It can bloom in different seasons, in unexpected places." Daniel reached for his sister's hand. "She wouldn't want either of you living in shadows." Julian felt something shift inside him, a loosening of grief he'd carried for years. "Your sister ran away because she thought it would dishonor Sarah's memory to care for me." Daniel's laugh turned into a cough. When he recovered, he fixed Iris with a stern look. "Sarah spent her life helping people heal. How could loving the same man dishonor that?" Blossoming again. 3 months later, Julian stood in his garden, watching autumn paint the leaves in fiery hues. The roses Iris had planted now bloomed abundantly, their fragrance sweetening the cooling air. Behind him, the door opened. "They look beautiful," Iris said, stepping onto the terrace with 2 steaming mugs. "They had a good teacher," he replied. Accepting the coffee she offered, Iris wore one of his sweaters, too large for her frame, but perfect in the way it symbolized their growing closeness. After Daniel had stabilized enough for an experimental treatment, Julian had convinced them both to return to Portland. Daniel now occupied the guest house, where he spent his stronger days writing his memoirs and his weaker ones surrounded by the gardens his sister had created. "Daniel's asking for you," Iris said. "He wants help with the chapter about Sarah." Julian nodded, his heart full. Talking about Sarah no longer felt like reopening a wound. Instead, it had become a way of honoring her, keeping her spirit alive in the stories they shared with Daniel, who treasured each new detail about his former doctor. "Before we go," Julian said, reaching for Iris's hand, "I have something to show you." He led her to a freshly turned section of soil near the eastern wall. A small sapling stood there, its delicate branches reaching skyward. "A cherry tree?" Iris asked, her eyes brightening. Sarah loved them. She always wanted to visit Japan during blossom season. Julian squeezed her hand. "I thought we could plant it for her. And for Daniel. And for us." Iris looked up at him, understanding the symbolism. "A new beginning that honors the past." "Exactly." Julian brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sarah once told me that love doesn't divide when shared, it multiplies. I didn't understand what she meant until now." Iris stepped closer, resting her head against his chest. "I used to feel guilty for finding you, for staying. And now? Now I think maybe Sarah led me to you somehow. Through Daniel, through her letters." She looked up at him. "Does that sound foolish?" Julian shook his head. "It sounds like something she would do." The setting sun gilded the garden around them as Julian lowered his head to kiss her. It wasn't their first kiss, but it felt significant, a promise, a continuation, a new chapter being written. When they parted, Iris whispered, "Do you think there are some connections that are simply meant to be? That find their way despite everything?" Julian thought of the unlikely chain of events that had brought them together. Sarah's patient becoming Iris's brother, Iris finding her way to his door, the shared grief that had somehow blossomed into something beautiful. "I think," he said, looking at the cherry sapling that would one day burst into glorious bloom, "that the most beautiful gardens grow from unexpected seeds." As they walked hand in hand toward the guest house where Daniel waited, Julian felt a sense of wholeness he'd thought forever lost. Their story wasn't conventional. It had grown from loss and secrets, from pain and healing. But like the gardens Iris had tended so lovingly, it had transformed into something neither could have imagined, something that honored the past while embracing a future filled with promise. In the distance, Daniel waved from the window, a living connection to a love that hadn't ended, but had instead found new ways to grow.